Welcome, 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 my lovely brothers and sisters. Welcome with this new live book reading. Today, as you can see, we will start with the beginning of tyranny. The other two parts of the kingdom of death will also come, but I was guided yesterday evening to the importance, great importance, of this topic because we are living in a tyrannical world for at least 13,000 of years, at least. So, Spirit told me yesterday evening that all these concepts of socialism, communism, democracy, and so on, they are nothing more than, in actuality, tyranny disguised as something else. So the overlords brought us the false idea of socialism, communism, fascism, and dictatorship, that is what tyranny is, and totalitarianism, that is what people think that we are now in. But as a matter of fact, Spirit told me that we are for at least 13,000 of years in a tyrannical system, run by a full-blown psychopath, and we all know psychopaths are tyrants. And so this world is in the hand of a gigantic tyrant, and this tyrant, of course, gets the help of the proxies and minions here on Earth, whom we know by their names as Cabal, Illuminati, oligarchs, the Lites, and so on. But it's just several labels for just one group. And there's a question in this because many people should ask themselves the question, where is all the root laid of all this cruelty in this world? The cruelty that we see in this world is based on tyranny. And all those people that we call dictators are in actuality tyrants. Let us look to the Second World War with Stalin and Lenin and Hitler and whatever. These people were in actuality tyrants, especially if you see what has happened in Russia. And so this world is still populated with tyrants, but we need to see where the root is laid. So the coming 3 or 4 parts, because it's quite a chapter, quite a paper that we go through. It is paper 10 from Wes Penre's book, the Wes Penre Papers, the second level of learning. You can see the cover picture of this book in the headline picture. And please buy yourselves this book yourself. Start reading it with your spiritual eyes and ask your spirit to be with you when you are reading this book so that you get a deeper understanding of what Wes Penre is writing here and is speaking all about. Let's begin. Paper 10, The Beginning of Tyranny, Part 1. Lord Enki was a master geneticist, perhaps the best in Orion Empire. Trained directly under his mother, Queen Nektit. He had been on many planets that had not yet developed any life forms and was accustomed to toxic atmospheres and rocky deserts. Perhaps 1,000,000 Earth years or more had faced and passed since the War of the Titans and the total destruction of Terra, and now Enki, as a skilled scientist, was sent by his stepfather, King Anu, to explore the destroyed planet to see if anything could be rebuilt on it. This piece of information, if I read this, then the first picture that comes in my mind is this movie Wall-E from the Pixar Disney Studios, and this animation film in which a tiny robot discovers life on Earth because he discovers a shoe with a sprouting plant in it. So um, if we know that the movie industry is in actuality telling history, but in such a way that only those in the know and only those who have the ears to hear, the spiritual ears to hear, and the spiritual eyes to see, they see the truth elements in the movies presented to us by the movie industry. So in Wall-E, there is a bit of background information of history placed in it too. But again, only those who have the spiritual ears and the spiritual eyes to see it, they will see and hear it. Eventually, what remained of the giant planet Terra was catapulted toward the sun by the explosion. One fragment was relatively intact and was captured by the gravity of Mars and Venus and placed into orbit around the Sun, between the two smaller planets. So Terra, which had once been quite giant, was now only slightly bigger than Venus. The other part of the old Terra had become the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. But not only that, when Terra exploded, Mars, its atmosphere, was sucked out into space as well. And lots of people died there too. So there was life on Mars. All that was left, all that was left was a thin atmosphere that no one could breathe. Contrary to Terra, Mars was never rebuilt and reseeded. Once activity resumed on Terra, Mars was repopulated as well, but only by Syrians, who built a scientific and military base beneath Mars's surface. We have learned from many good sources that Mars was also used for genetic experiments, which continued underground after the depletion of its atmosphere. A skeleton crew of Syrians and their helpers is supposedly still there up to this very day. Now, hopefully you get an understanding of why they are so frequently speaking about going to Mars. Enki rarely traveled in the Syrians' hollowed-out craft unless he traveled together with them. Now he was alone in a new solar system, and this was his first time on Terra. He had heard so many stories about how beautiful it used to be here, and about his mother's, the queen, experiment with the living library and the creation of the Namlu'u, which are us. Well, better said, what's left of us. Now, however, that all seemed to be gone. Terra was without atmosphere, and the trees, lakes, rivers, and oceans had been sucked out into space. So Terra was a barren planet. Enki nano-traveled to Terra and could quickly browse the whole planet from a soul perspective and thus get a pretty good picture of how bad it was. and what needed to be done. If he had a body, he would have sighed. It would take time to rebuild this planet, but it was definitely possible. The first step he needed to take was to recreate the planet's atmosphere and magnetic field. Gone was the entire living library and all that came with it. And this sentence is very important because this is, as a matter of fact, going on here on this earth. Gone was the living library and all that came with it. We are rapidly destroying the living library called Earth. And so if we are not waking up to the fact that we are living in a tyrannical system that demands from us to destroy our planet, then eventually all life forms will be gone. And this is already going on because many, many, many animals are dying out, which means have this decided to leave this world because they do not want to participate any longer in a new level of tyranny. And so many animal souls have decided to leave this planet. So this is why we see a mass going of animals, no matter if they're birds, insects, mammals, doesn't matter. Many of the animal life forms have decided to leave this planet, which is a very bad thing and a very concerning thing that this is happening. And it's all because humanity still doesn't want to wake up. And it's because humanity still does not want to say no to the participation of all these tyrannical agendas. The entire green movement is nothing more than Marduk's tyrannical agendas of the 21st century. This so-called World Economic Forum agendas, World Economic Forum is Marduk's platform, is the platform of this tyrant. We see this in the plans that they are rolling out. It's all tyrannical. When does humanity say no and stops participating in all this tyranny? If no tree is standing anymore in this world, Enki could not build such a thing on his own or together with his scientific team. It required the participation of thousands upon thousands of evolved planets. However, he knew, of course, how to see plants and animals and also how to create higher intelligent life forms. However, his mission was first to rebuild Terra so it could become habitable again. So the Kanus Kanur, better said the King of Kings, wanted his gold and minerals. And who is the King of Kings? That is Kan and Lil. And Marduk is striving to become this Kan and Lil. So Marduk is striving here on earth also to become this Kanus Kanur, King of Kings. And as we now know, Marduk is also Jesus, and he is also God the Father of this world. So the Christians are worshipping a tyrant. The Kanus Kanur / Kan Enlil wanted his gold and minerals and for the Syrian workers to descend to the planet, they needed a world with an atmosphere. This, a sustainable atmosphere. And Enki required large quantities of quartz to develop intelligent life. It was needed for the artificial wombs. And these artificial wombs are also here already on Earth. And they are in actuality in the underground bases, where they are creating artificial life, artificial human life also. After he had rebuilt the atmosphere and magnetic field, Enki allowed founders from near and far to direct asteroids and comets toward Terra. So this means what is being told to us through the movies, especially the Matrix series, movie series. We can know that a lot of things that has been presented through these movies are already going on, and many people are discovering, so to say, new life forms. But these new life forms are not created by Earth itself. These new life forms, these new animal species, are in actuality in underground laboratory created species whom are being set out into the so-called wild. So I continue. These asteroids included specific DNA that would help recreate the life forms on the planet. And for a while, the atmosphere was bombarded with space rocks. So Enki selected a team of scientists, and they settled in an era, and they settled in an area of the planet that is today Eastern Siberia, and began building laboratories high on a mountain where the earth met the sky. And there was a large lake. Here was where intelligent life would be seeded once the reconstruction of Terra permitted it. This was where the most powerful lightning storms occurred in the beginning of time. Normally, a seeding process that could take millions, sometimes billions of years. The king wanted to be completed as fast as possible. So Enki's task was to accomplish that. After Terra was destroyed, the king lost a lot of income from his mining projects. He knew it was not going to be as lucrative as it used to be, with a big chunk of the planet torn to pieces. But if he was lucky, there were still a lot of resources to dig up. So Enki did what he could to accelerate the panspermia process, and soon there was thunder and lightning in the air all over the planet, igniting the seeds of life, and the first rains began. The rains became heavier and heavier, and the oceans began to fill. Enki and his team left the planet for a while to allow everything to develop. When Enki and his scientists returned, they planted forests worldwide to increase oxygen production, and Mother Terra could breathe with her own lungs again. And this oxygen is also rapidly being taken away because we see the killing of trees in a rapid pace. So humanity is literally destroying its entire home planet. And there are many people complaining that they lack oxygen. Well, how come? Because of the chopping of too many trees at once per day. Thousands and thousands and thousands of trees are being killed, which means thousands and thousands and thousands of trees that were able to give us, humans, animals, and other life forms, oxygen. When do we start to wake up to all the things? When are we starting to participate? When are we stop participating, with all these tyrannical agendas? When are we coming to the realization that if we continue in this pace, that eventually we will kill ourselves too and cease out of existence ourselves too? So I continue. Life eventually developed in the oceans and land animals started to reappear. Terra was slowly being revived. Enki had reconstructed Terra in record time, and Terra Nova, the new Terra, was born. Some say that the word Earth is actually a name honoring Enki. Why? Because in Earth is the name E and A, Ea, whose title later changed to Ea, Prince Ea, the god of sweet waters, thus Earth, Earth. In actuality, Earth. Whether this is true or not is open for debate and discussion, but this is probably a good time for me to change the name of our planet in my own story from Terra to Earth or Terra Nova in an interchangeable fashion. So in addition, Enki had genetically engineered tall, strong reptilian bodies, which he had stored in large tanks on Mars in a dormant state. So on Mars, Enki already had created strong reptilian bodies. Yeah, let this sink in. They were waiting to be transferred to Nova Terra to remain hidden in the underground caverns, put away and locked into a frequency slightly above the 3D density that held the Earth signature. This way, the bodies would not be found by anyone except those they were intended for and who had the frequency keys. So when the Syrians arrived with their hollowed out craft, themselves traveling in the nano world, they would have perfect bodies they could use for their 3D experience. Bodies that had been tested elsewhere on other planets, the Syrians had conquered. Hence, these reptilian vessels were familiar to them. So the um, King Enlil, or Khan Enlil, was very pleased and conferred on Enki the title Lord of the Earth. The planet was again full of life forms, but there was no living library anymore, and the Namlu'u shepherds were gone. Enki took an extended vacation and returned to the stars, not returning for a few thousand years. Earth needed to adjust to rapid reconstruction, and different plants and animals needed to be synchronized into this young ecological system. So when he came back, everything was working just the way he had planned. Other creator gods were here when he returned. The vegans had experimented with their own genes, created monkeys and apes. So this is interesting to know that some monkey species, some ape species carry the DNA of vegans in them, which now contained their own genes, and even some Cadistu from worlds in Orion and Ursa Major and Ursa Minor were here, experimenting with the new fauna and flora. And these creator gods, just like the vegans, had added species to the ecosystem. Enki recognized them from the stars because some of them manifested in their proper form, while others must have formed their own bases somewhere in the solar system, where they had their own laboratories, including bodies is and in storage, just like Enki had. Some were reptilians, others amphibious and humanoid species were here as well, such as the vegans. Enki didn't mind this, and the Kadistu races knew to stay away from the Syrians upon their arrival. Finally, the day came when Enki returned to Sirius and informed the king that he could send over people to mine on Earth again. So the atmosphere should now be just right and the planet's rotation sufficient to support Syrian workers. Enki's encounter in the forest. Soon the Syrian ships started appearing around Earth and their domestic aircraft descended on the planet. The expedition was led by Lord Enlil, the Lord of the Airways. Still, he was also titled Lord of Command, being the commander of the mining project, and basically in charge of the whole project Aridu, or Project Aridu, except for the scientific part, which was been given to Enki, who had to give power away to his stepbrother, something he found unfair, but nothing he could do much about it. After all, he was Aryan and not a Syrian. Enlil couldn't believe what his brother had managed to do. And here we speak about Prince Enlil. Um, so this new planet was almost a beautiful and quite similar to the old Terra, although much smaller. The atmosphere was perfect for the giant reptilian bodies they reanimated. The temperature was warmer than it had been, which was appreciated. But Enki said there would eventually be ice ages. So everything of which we think goes naturally goes in actuality according a certain script. And it was inevitable. So for once the two brothers were on the same page, and Enlil greeted his brother with respect for what he had accomplished. They celebrated and got drunk at Enki's residence, and the party lasted for several days until Enlil finally told his men that it was time to start working. More miners were on their way from Sirius. As soon as Enlil got a chance to settle down on Earth, he started building the grid system and sealed off the stargates that led into and out from Earth. He also changed the planet's orbit so it became invisible, so to speak, to other star beings who might want to explore Lord Enlil. To other star beings who might want to explore Dot. And then Lord Enlil thus had the sole power to decide who could enter and who could leave the planet. Well, almost the grid, meant to keep the star from being out, was imperfect with holes. However, how hard they tried, they could not seal Earth 100%. Lord Enki, the Aryan master geneticist working with his father's crew, had done a great job, but not significant enough. There was no living library. Hence, to both Lord Enki's, Lord Enlil's, and everybody else's surprise, new plants and animal species started to show up on Earth, seemingly from nowhere. Still, he was thrilled over what was being done by the creator gods, more skilled than he was. So he saw plants he had only heard of before, and he ate them. Soon enough, he was taken into another state of consciousness, which he otherwise only could reach outside 3D reality. Rabbits with long ears hopped around outside his cabin, and he started setting out traps to catch them because he would assume they tasted good. When he saw the apes, they caught his interest, and the scientist in him came to life. These could be genetically manipulated, he thought, to create an even more intelligent species. Some of them were just animals, but the vegans had been there while he was gone and had mixed their own genes with the big apes and managed to come up with Homo neanderthalensis and Homo erectus. So this means that the vegans have created the Homo neanderthalensis and the Homo erectus. So this gives a whole new perception of what has been taught to us. None of them too clever, but the first smarter than the second. The vegans had never been able to complete their experiment. However, they left it unfinished and the hominid apes ran free on the planet. So Homo erectus was much taller than modern humans, while Homo neanderthalensis was slightly shorter. Enki's dream had always been to create an intelligent star being with the fire of the mother goddess within it, as his mother had taught him when he was younger. She had done it with the Namlu'u, and to become a master geneticist of rank, he felt he needed to accomplish at least that. This was what he often sat and dreamed about on his porch outside his cabin, getting drunk on spirits, which means alcoholic beverages. Lord Enki was quite pleased with the results he had accomplished so far, but he had still been too young to contribute to the Namlu'u experiment, millions of years ago. By the time the War of the Titans was over, he and his half-sister Nin-Ur-Sag, generally called Nin or Ninki, had both graduated as master geneticists. This means they were both founders and could build worlds from the tiniest one-cell amoebas to highly intelligent star races. Lord Enki was later called Prince Ea or Ea here on Earth, and a prince he was. However, Prince Ea was never going to inherit either the kingdom of Sirius or the queendom of Orion, to his own dismay. The Syrian throne was reserved for Prince Enlil, who had pure Syrian blood and was a real son of the king. And in Orion, a male never inherited the throne. His stepsister, whom he loved dearly, could of course not inherit any throne either, although she was a princess, daughter of King Anu, as it were. Only males sat on the Syrian throne, or any other Syrian-dominated throne. By the time Enki arrived on Terra, Nin was both Enki's stepsister and consort. So the Queen of the Stars had grand plans for her talented son and hoped he would work with her to create new worlds and projects. She had noticed his genius early on, and this was the reason why she had trained him so hard. Enki certainly didn't mind the lessons However, there was a slight problem. In spirit, Enki was his stepfather's son. Um, for some reason, especially when he grew up, he spent more time in the Sirius Empire than he did in Orion. He particularly spent a lot of time around his stepfather, King Anu. In this way, he came to know his stepbrother Enlil quite nicely as well. As young adults, they apparently went along reasonably well, although they also had their disputes, which could be pretty heated. Enlil was a typical Syrian and, as such, was quite hot-headed. He was either in a pretty good mood or in a murderous fury. Numerous were the times when the two brothers were fighting, more so in their adolescence, if there is such a thing in Orion as adolescence. Enki was often the one who calmed Enlil, and thus their awkward friendship persisted well into adulthood. After the Titan War, the mining projects continued. It was business as usual, but the workers soon started protesting again, even louder this time, about long hours in the mines. This infuriated Enlil, and he let his guards and the mining supervisors whip those who dared to protest. So here is already the first tyranny, yeah, because this is pure tyranny. So Lord Enlil even rushed into the mines at times, speaking to the workers in anger. It's also tyranny, so also an aspect of tyranny. With his reptilian mock-up, his voice was magnified as he had used a bullhorn. He didn't need any. This seemed to help for a while, but the tension down in the mines increased every day, and everybody down there knew it was going to explode soon. Many complained about what a slave driver Enlil was. I don't know, but look around in this world. We are still dealing with slave masters. So many complained about what a slave driver Enlil was. It even got to a point where they rebelled against their boss and stormed his palace and almost killed him. And the Lord of Command had to hide in his abode in Nippur, Mesopotamia. Those working on the plantations were rebelling too. Enlil immediately used his powerful crystals to contact his father in Sirius, informed him of the problem and requested removal. He wanted to return home to Sirius and leave Earth permanently. Anu became furious when he learned of this problem as production halted and they lost revenue. Both Enlil and Enki were called back to Sirius, and Nin accompanied them. Enki had heard about the situation as well and had thought of a solution that could help his brother with the heavy task of keeping the miners happy. In addition, he could take advantage of the situation and find a reason to accomplish his dreams. He and Nin Ki, or Nin Ur Sach, proposed creating a slave race to perform the work of the Syrian miners, thereby relieving and discharging them and allowing them to return to Sirius after thousands of years of mining. This idea also forced Enlil to remain on Earth, something he was not thrilled about. The two siblings traveled back to Earth to see what they could do with King Anu's consent, Anu also liked the idea of having Enlil away from Sirius because there was always a chance Enlil would overthrow him and take over the empire. Enki built a second house in a beautiful wooden area of Earth, in what was to become his residence in a place called Eridu, and his shrine was E-Abzu. Every morning he set his traps to catch wild animals he could eat, something he had learned in Sirius. The traps were not of the kind that wounded the animal. Instead, they contained treats within a box-like structure that attracted the victim, and the trap closed behind it. However, every time Enki came back to get his prey, the traps had been opened and the prey was gone. First, he suspected one of the Syrian workers had stolen his food because they were hungry, and he complained to Enlil. However, Enlil stated that he kept a close eye on his workers after they left the mines late at night. He feared gatherings that could lead to rebellion, and no worker had ever come close to Enki's house. And I want to go back to this sentence. He feared gatherings that could lead to rebellion. So now you get the understanding why it is needed that there is a camera on every corner of the street, so that they can keep an eye on us, they, the overlords, the archons with capital A, to see if we will have secret gatherings that could be dangerous to them. If this were true, Enki was unaware, so he asked Enlil if he could borrow one of his cameras used to monitor the workers. Wow. And his brother consented. This is interesting, lovely brothers and sisters. So this is, in actuality, directly pointing to the time that we are in, because almost every street corner has a camera. So now you get the understanding that slavery still exists, and in actuality we go back to an ancient system. All right, I repeat. So if this were true, Enki was unaware, so he asked Enlil if he could borrow one of his cameras used to monitor the workers, and his brother consented. Enki set up the camera well hidden in a tree close to one of the traps and went home for the evening. The next morning, when he returned as usual, the trap was empty and clearly had been broken into, indicating that an animal had been captured and then released by someone. This is also being described by the Pleiadians who work with Barbara Marciniak in the book The Bringers of the Dawn. Enki was excited to find out who had stolen his meal, so he brought the film home to his E-Abzu and ran it through his computer. So computers are not new. He saw a rabbit swallowing the bait and getting caught in the trap. Only a few minutes later, a tall and slender humanoid appeared by the trap. Without looking around, this strange naked creature, Enki noticed it was androgynous but was still transmitting feminine energies, bent down, opened the trap, lifted out the animal, and took it in her arms, holding it to comfort it. To Enki's surprise, the rabbit didn't seem scared in the arms of this wondrous humanoid, but could but this rabbit became calm, and like a mistreated child, it clung to her. It seemed like the humanoid communicated to the rabbit telepathically and gave it a lot of love. Then she set the rabbit down, where it jumped into the woods and disappeared. The humanoid stood up, carefully opened a few branches of the tree in front of her, and found the camera. She stared into it as if she had never seen one before. Then she turned around and gracefully disappeared back into the woods. The Prince of Orion was surprised. He pressed a couple of buttons on his computer and replayed the film. He was pretty fascinated by this unusual being. He had heard about the Namlu'u, the ones the Syrians called the Lus, or the Lulus, from both his mother and people in Sirius. Now, when he had seen them in real life, he was mighty impressed, as a geneticist in particular. His mother, the great queen, Nektet, better said the queen of the stars, had called them her masterpiece, and now he started to understand what she meant. How on earth do you create a being like that? Enki's creative and artistic mind began to work, and in his head he calculated how his mother must have put the cells together in a particular structure, and some ideas about how it was done came to the young prince's mind. But more than all that, he was very surprised. Where did the Lus come from? He didn't put them there, and when he arrived at Terra, she was dead and barren. The only explanation was that some Lus had survived by fleeing underground before the great R hit Terra and split it into two. That prompted Enki to wonder whether more creatures had survived. The truth of the matter was that many Namlu'u indeed had escaped underground, assisted by a few titans that survived the impact with destroyed old Terra. When Enki restored the planet's flora and fauna, the original humans had remained underground. There was nothing for them up there because the living library was gone, and the Namlu'u's task was to guard the living library. However, the Titans told them to bide their time, and they were right. Founders of a very high rank had suddenly penetrated the grid, moved through the corridors of time, and inserted the living library again. As soon as the Namlu'u found out, they left the caverns in droves and went out on the steppes and savannas and into the forests to herd the new animals. The Titans, however, remained underground. Enki was very excited and thought that if he could capture one of these creatures, he could take cell and DNA samples from her and use them in his own experiments. But first he needed to study the species in theory. So he looked them up on one of his mesa to find out more about them. Fortunately for him, his mother had entrusted him with the information and placed it on his mess. After studying them in detail, a plan began to take shape in his mind. With time, it became clear to both Enki and Enlil that quite a few of the Lu'us had survived the impact and had come up from underground. They were walking through the forests and savannas of Earth, attempting to resume their task of herding the animals. However, they were shocked when they observed that the animals in this new world did not behave as they had on the old Terra. These animals were of a lower consciousness and ate one another. Many of them ate meat, so to the Namlu'u this was unacceptable, and they attempted to communicate with them, but they were less responsive than before. The tall humanoids failed to change their behavior, realizing they were not designed to survive on light, grass, and plants alone. Discouraged, they turned to the herbivorous animals and herded them, thereby protecting them from the carnivores. This, of course, was a fruitless project, but herding and guarding the library was what the Namlu'u were once designated to do so. Although they had the power to change their destiny, as an interdimensional species, their love for nature was immense. So, with this said, those among us who have a great love for nature and for animals, it could be that they have still some residue of the primordial human in them, known as Namlu'u. They could no longer communicate with Orion, leaving them with what they had. In fact, when Enlil had tampered with the electromagnetic field of Terra Nova, it had also altered the behavior of the animals. They had lost their ability to absorb light and use it for food and were now forced to eat one another. So now we get the deeper understanding of why we see what is going on in this world and also in the animal world. This was the beginning of the end for the gracious Namlu'u. So again, those of us whom are very nature loving, whose hearts cry to see that so many nature is being taken down, so many animals are dying, the abuse and cruelty against nature, against animals, those of us who have this deep need to save animals and nature, they carry still some of the primordial human beings in them. So the influences of them. And you can say a genetic memory in them. And with this said, I will see yeah. All right. A pact between Enki and Enlil. This is the last piece for today of part 1 of this paper 10, The Beginning of Tyranny. The first mining projects began in what is now South Africa, later expanded to South America, and subsequently to other regions worldwide. The Syrians were looking not only for gold, but also for the other precious metals as usual. Why? For all their technology, because Syrians lack spirit. And this is the reason why they try to enforce us into technology. But we do not need technology because we have spirit. We are spirited beings with 12 strands of DNA. So we do not need technology. In actuality, technology is as a matter of fact, degrading us and let's technology makes us more declining in frequency, in vibration, because we are no longer working with spirit, with our spirit, but with technology, which means that we decline ourselves rapidly. So the Syrians were looking not only for gold, but also for other precious metals as usual. There were more planetary bodies in the solar system besides Earth, which were hoarding precious metals and minerals, and soon enough the Syrians were digging on other planets in our solar system as well. To date, the Syrians have bases on the Moon, on Mars, and the moons of Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. There are indications that they have bases on Venus too. It was a challenge. It was a challenging task for Lord Enlil to keep the miners in check, not only on Earth but also on the other planetary bodies. So he received little sleep and worked around the clock to prevent workers from revolting. And the more he had to interfere, the more furious he became. So the situation was unbearable for everybody involved. Enki and Nin were working hard in the laboratories in Siberia and in the underground facilities on Mars to create a species his brother could use in the mines. Enki made a pact with his brother. If they, Enki and Nin, could create a race of humanoid beings that were strong enough to work in the mines, and they agreed to produce them and give them to Enlil, on the condition that Enlil treated them well, which of course Enlil never did, and let them just be what they were supposed to be, workers. Enlil agreed, falsely of course, relieved to hear that his nightmare would perhaps soon be over. Enki and Nin and their team of helpers, some of them vegans, tried out prototypes after prototype and then abandoned them. Nin was sometimes ruthless in eradicating the prototypes they didn't like or didn't work, and utterly destroyed the bodies because she didn't want to leave any traces of the failures. Enki, on the other hand, had much greater difficulty with this and worked with precision to avoid making too many mistakes. Still, it was impossible not to, and he thought to himself was the part that it was part of the job he liked the least. Some of the prototypes, such as the Centaur, which is half man, half horse, were tested in the mines to carry bags of gold from the caves and up the elevators to the surface, but were discontinued. They tried minotaurs with bulls' heads and human bodies, but they couldn't do the job either. Finally, after an endless amount of experiments, they crossed the genes of the Homo neanderthalensis, possibly with those of the Namlu'u and a couple of other star races, but didn't want to use Syrian genes. No, because Syrian genes are very aggressive genes. Syrian beings are cruel, aggressive beings, and you can say they are tyrants. So, of course, he didn't want to have these genes, as it would probably insult the overlords. There had been some suggestions that Enki should use Homo erectus to create the slave worker, but Enki had just frowned upon it and said that they were way too stupid. He refused to use them in his experiments. The Neanderthals were social, reasonably intelligent, and more spiritual than Homo erectus. Little did Enki know at the time that Homo erectus would eventually be used to create Homo sapiens. Enki and Nin took their prototype to a council meeting and showed the beast to King Anu, who at the moment resided on Mars. There were also other star races in alliance with the Sirians in the solar system at the time, such as the races from Draco, Zeta Reticuli, and even some vegans who had broken up with Orion and allied themselves with the Dark Lords. There was a large crowd when the two scientists presented their product. King Anu stepped out of his chair and approached the beast. He squeezed the muscles in the black skin of the beast's arm, checked out the muscles all over the body, and looked deep into his eyes. He also noticed, to his satisfaction, that this prototype was asexual. Then he returned to his seat and sat quietly for a while. So Enlil broke the silence, saying he didn't like it. It seemed too bright, and that in combination with its strength could be devastating. He wanted a race that was easier to handle, not harder. Anu nodded his head. He said he liked the body type. It was perfect for work, both in the mines and on the large plantations, and for digging for quartz as well. Anu knew that Enki and Nin needed quartz, lots of quartz, for the artificial wombs they were using when experimenting with genetics. Fortunately, that existed in abundance on Nova Terra. However, between quotation marks, Anu continued, I want you to reduce the brain cavity of the beast and make it more stupid. When I looked into its eyes, I observed intelligence. Does he have genes from the Luus? Does he have genes from the Luus? If he does, I do not want that. The Luus can aimlessly wander around on the steppes. I don't care, but I sure do not want their consciousness in my workers. Enki felt quite offended and didn't want to create a stupid race. Or they could just as well take the Erectus and use them instead, as the vegans also had done. Still, he knew he couldn't say that, so he went back to the laboratories to manipulate their creation. He and Nin reduced the brain cavity, and the two decided to use some genes of a race from the Draco system, who were a reptilian hominoid or hominid worker species. So now we get an understanding why and from where the reptilian brain in us is coming from. So he and Nin reduced the brain cavity, and the two decided to use some genes of a race from the Draco system, who were a reptilian hominid worker species, strong and quite obedient, used to following orders. Downgrading animals to reduce perceived consciousness was nothing extraordinary. It was done routinely. When genetically manipulating animals to exhibit too much consciousness. Also, the vegan geneticists did it all the time when they manipulated the apes. They didn't want them to show too much awakening for their taste. So now you can see that everything that is being visible here in this earth is in actuality created in laboratories. Let that sink in. Nin, however, had much less respect for the consciousness involved than Enki did, and she had no qualms about killing off inappropriate prototypes. To her, just like to Enlil, as we shall see, killing off experiments was nothing more than a routine thing, than stepping on a bug. This new prototype was immediately approved by the Syrian Council and put on trial. This version was stocky, black-skinned, and had large hands, indicating a worker-oriented design. 100 beasts were put to labor in the mines to observe how the beast reacted to commands and how well she performed. And I say she because the beast was still androgynous, just like what the Syrian overlords wanted. Being asexual made them more docile. It worked out according to the plan, and even Enlil began to accept them, though he remained somewhat reserved for a long time. So Enki and Nin used their artificial wombs in their laboratories to create more bodies. An ethical question arose. However, which souls would like to take the bodies of all these workers? Who wanted to be a worker in the mines and who wanted to be a worker on the plantations? Nin said that the answer was simple. A grid surrounded the planet and was locked in, but discarnate souls remained within the planet's atmosphere and have been since the Earth was isolated. These could be used initially. So Enki agreed, at least for the moment, because he had other plans as well. And with this said, I have come to the end of the first part of reading from paper 10, The Beginning of Tyranny. The next time I will go through the sub-chapters of Lady of the Lake, and also, that is a long one, integrating Project Elohim with earlier experiments. That's also a very interesting piece of this chapter. And then the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. We have a distorted storytelling about that one. And then the departure of a divine species. This is about the departure of the last Namlu'us, or better known as the first primordial humans. And then the Cain and Abel bloodlines. We have already discussed that one in other parts of the books that I went through. All right, I want to thank you so much for tuning in through Facebook, through YouTube, and through Rumble. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking your time to listen along. I truly hope that this information, and just see it as information, will sink into your mind, heart, and soul. Ponder upon it and ask your spirit to help you to clarify this information and to understand an in-depth understanding of this information that is presented to you. So the coming period, I will be focused on this topic, the beginning of tyranny, and also will continue with the kingdom of death, part 3 and 4. Or at least part 3, maybe a part 4. Again, thank you so much, and I wish you all a beautiful day filled with a lot of sunshine, love, wisdom, truth, and revelations, all coming from your own spirit. And please start working with your own spirit. Your spirit knows the answers. And as last, let us listen to a beautiful piece of music created by Ben Sound, and it's titled Slow Life. See you next time.